Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today. My name is Jack McDougall, President and CEO of the Greater Washington Board of Trade. As all of us are continuing to be impacted by COVID-19, as our region is working through the various phases of reopening, for the business community, some businesses are slowly coming back. Others, as we know, aren't coming back at all, and others are hanging in there and doing okay. We know some sectors, hospitality, restaurants, transportation, retail, are especially hard hit. Many people are still working from home. That's likely to continue for the near term. Other people are reporting to work to provide essential services, and a significant number of people have lost their jobs. And on top of all of the public health and economic priorities we're facing, we also must persist in our efforts to remedy longstanding social and economic inequities, both nationally and across the region. So our world's turned upside down, and to discuss all of this with us, we're very grateful to be joined this morning by our special guests, the Honorable Angela Alsobrooks, Prince George's County Executive. Angela is a proud lifelong Prince Georgian, was elected as the 8th County Executive in 2018, and is the first woman to hold that position. We also have with us today the Honorable Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council of the District of Columbia. Phil was first elected to the council in November 1998 as an at-large council member. He served in that role until June 2012 when he was selected to serve as chair. We also have the Honorable Jeffrey McKay, Chairman of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. Jeff is a lifelong Fairfax County resident, born and raised on the historic Route 1 corridor in the Lee District. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to be with us today, and I personally want to thank each of you for your leadership during these challenging times. I know this isn't easy. But before we get started, I want to also acknowledge and quickly thank our presenting sponsor, Capital One Bank. Hearing directly from our region's elected officials is always valuable, especially now. And so again, thank you to Capital One for making this morning possible. So we have a lot to discuss today. We likely won't cover every topic. Still, we will leave some time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature. And we will get to as many of those as we can. And so with that, let's get started. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about the pandemic. We're now roughly 8 months into this since it started, though at times it seems like it's been years. Over that time, how has your thinking and approach to the pandemic evolved as we continue to experience this? Let's start with you, Angela.
Well, good morning. First of all, I want to thank you so much, Jack, and to thank the Board of Trade for the amazing job that you've done to make sure our region grows economically and that we have the strongest neighborhood, so to speak, in the country. I also want to just say good morning and thank you to Chairman Mendelson and Chair McKay for your leadership as well. This pandemic, I tell you, has been, I think for all of us, it has in many ways changed all of the assumptions we had as we started 2020. But what I can tell you, Prince George's, as you know, is the jurisdiction that was hardest hit in the region and in our state with over 33,000 positive cases. We saw not only the greatest number of cases, but of course our business community was greatly impacted. Prince George's County, prior to COVID, created more jobs in Maryland than any jurisdiction in Maryland for 5 consecutive years. And that was due to the really smart policies, not only of my predecessor, but I know that David Iannucci is watching and our folks from Economic Development Corporation, Angie Rogers. They've done a great job of creating jobs and really just investing heavily in our transit-oriented development areas, 5 major centers, and doing an amazing job of working to increase the commercial tax base, increase our economy. And you know what? I say that to say that this pandemic has really, I think, really strengthened our resolve to continue along that same vein, to make sure that we are continuing to make smart investments, not only in those areas around transit-oriented development, but this has actually given us, Jack, if you can believe it, really an opportunity is how I've looked at it. It has been a time of great struggle, but great opportunity also to make sure that we're making smart investments in education. Because we believe that those investments in education are likewise investments in economic development, to make sure that our children have increased access to technology, to make sure that we're aligning them all year long. And after this pandemic is done, we won't stop. We provided free summer school for our children. Last summer, we are also more closely connecting them to the library system, to NASA. We have a wonderful opportunity that's come about through Amazon. So we're really working to make sure that we're making the right investments. And I can tell you that it is, that so far what we're feeling is that we are very, very well positioned to continue to work. And really because Prince George's in our state has the greatest amount of undeveloped land still left. We have open, breathable spaces. So we're seeing that we're going to actually have some really great opportunity when this pandemic passes.
Well, that's great. Yeah, and congratulations. I mean, that 5-year streak on job creation is really impressive. You know, and once we were able to rebound out of this, looking forward to that restoring, as well as the rest of the state and the region continuing to grow and create jobs. Phil, in the district, how are you all thinking about, and you know, even just personally, you know, your perspectives on the pandemic? And you know, again, I'm still struck by, you know, we're in month 8, you know, and there doesn't necessarily seem to be an end in sight. You know, and so how do we continue to, you know, work our way through this?
Good question. Well, I would say that because you started out asking how our thinking has evolved, I would say that in March when this started, we thought that this would be much more temporary.
Right.
And now it feels like it's permanent, even though we know that it will come to an end. And for myself, we're trying to figure out how we transition back to normal, and not that we're there yet but what can we be doing now, for example, with our public education system, so that we make up for what we believe is a learning gap. We've had an achievement gap, and we assume it's gotten worse. How do we make this up? And we're thinking much more about that today than we were 9 months ago when we went into this. I would say one thing that we've been consistent about, and I think that's true for the whole region, is that we have been adhering to public health guidance rather than what we've seen elsewhere in the country, where there is this political struggle between what everybody would like to do, which is to pretend that it's normal, and what the public health experts are recommending. I am personally nervous about where we in the city and the region are going to go with this pandemic, because we're seeing that the incidence, the second surge, appears to have begun across the country. And how long can we hold out before we see that there's a turnaround? I'm looking at statistics in the district. We've been adhering pretty closely to what the public health experts have recommended in the metrics. So we're in phase 2. We didn't get to phase 3, which is a further reopening, but we seem to be pretty solidly in phase 2. Test positivity rate, the goal is that the positivity rate is between 3 and 10%. We're at 2%. The health capacity system, what is the utilization in our hospitals? The goal is under 80%, and we are right now at 78%, and that's not counting any of the surge capacity. The daily case rate, the goal is between 5 and 15, at least for phase 2, and we are right now at 8.8. That's 8.8 per 100,000, 7-day average. So the numbers appear solid, but are they going to get worse? We were lucky as the district is unique among all the jurisdictions in the region, in that we are city, county, and state. So we were able to do things very quickly that some of the local jurisdictions had to wait for the state to do. We moved quickly with regard to issues like a moratorium on evictions, but we have to start thinking about how we are going to transition back to normal. We can't continue with a lot of the moratoria that we have to try to protect people. So I would say that where my thinking has changed is that rather than how do we act quickly to protect people as we get into this pandemic, we need to start thinking about how we get back to normal when the numbers, the public health numbers, get better.
Do you have any thoughts then on what the timing might look like as you migrate into phase 3? If the numbers look solid right now, is it still kind of waiting to see where we might go with a potential surge, or move more quickly than that?
Well, my sense is that we're not going to get to phase 3 in the near future, that we have to hold our own. And it's not just the district, but the region as we see this second surge across the country. So I don't think it's realistic to be thinking of phase 3, our further reopening right now. The thinking for a long time has been when there's a vaccine, we're all going to be able to reopen. I'm not sure it's that simple because, as we know, there's concern about what is the quality of that vaccine, how many people are actually going to take advantage of it. And as we are sitting here today, we don't know how effective that vaccine will be in terms of, do you take the vaccine once and you're good for your lifetime, or you take the vaccine every year or every half a year? We just don't know. So it's hard to say about getting to phase 3. I just want to be able to hold our own in phase 2.
Okay, yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of uncertainty surrounding all of these issues. Jeff, out in Fairfax, how are you all, evolving in your thinking and your approach to the pandemic, and where do things sit right now?
First, Jack, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with Angela and Phil. And, I think as a region, we rise together, and the more we can work together as a team, certainly helps the entire metropolitan region. And so I think you've seen a lot of that with the pandemic, as Phil just mentioned, adherence to many of the health guidelines. As a region, we're doing so much better than other parts of the country. And frankly, as Northern Virginia, we now know we're doing far better than other parts of the Commonwealth of Virginia as well. And so we're grateful for that. But to answer your question, I think it's fair to say we've evolved in a similar way as the other two speakers, and that we have gone from what I always referred to as responding in a sprint to now responding in a marathon. And I think we all know that, unfortunately, this is no longer a short-term impact on our economy and our people, but rather a new way of life. And so we have certainly evolved in looking at this in a more permanent standpoint. That being said, we're also begun the process of looking forward to a post-pandemic life, and we've begun to engage our community in an economic recovery framework so that, frankly, we can be doing everything we can to support our economy, support recovery, and support, getting back to life as close to normal as we knew it before. I think one of the there's been a number of positive things that have come out of this. I think Angela mentioned a few. Clearly, as a community in Fairfax, what I have seen is that our best days are when we're tested. It's easy to perform great when things are going well, but in the middle of a pandemic is when your community strength really shines. And I've been very proud at the way in which our nonprofits, our social service providers have responded. I've been very proud at this new dialogue in Fairfax that we've had about what I refer to as our new heroes. We've always talked about our first responders, our teachers as heroes. They're always heroes. But now we're talking about people who work at grocery stores, who deliver packages, who work in our retail stores, that have tried to keep our economy moving forward as our new heroes. And what that has done is provided an opening for a discussion and something I've long advocated for, which is a much more robust affordable housing policy, where we can really look to our most vulnerable in our community, value them, provide affordable housing in a network. And in a pandemic, you've seen a gravitation towards helping the most vulnerable. And clearly, this pandemic has shown another light on the disproportionality that exists in our thriving economy, where some people are still suffering and not making it. Disproportionate positive test cases because of living conditions and professions. And so I think it shifted a conversation, at least in Fairfax, more towards the priority that I have of building one Fairfax, where we are intentional in our policies at looking at social and racial justice and making sure that the decisions we make are intended to lift up all people, including our most vulnerable, including our new defined heroes in our economy that we think about differently today. And so, those things are heartening, and those things make you feel really good about the community that we live in, the region that we live in. But we really must be thinking about this in a marathon and not a sprint, be thinking about how we're going to rebuild our economy better than it was before, and thinking about how we're going to bring along all people in our community in our future success.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem clear that this is going to extend well into next year, and then the ramifications much beyond that. You know, one of the things that it seems that's driving a lot of this too is just information, or oftentimes lack of information. We've talked a little bit about the uncertainty. You know, from the outset, we haven't known an awful lot about this disease, and you know, as we keep learning more and we keep, you know, modifying the guidance, you know, a lot of folks are just genuinely, you know, very concerned. What are we doing? What are you all doing in each of your jurisdictions? And then what do we need to be doing regionally to restore public confidence? How are we going to get people back out of their houses, and how are we going to get them back on transit? How are we going to get them back into restaurants? How do we get them back into retail? Because right now that's sort of like rolling the dice and doing that. Angela, what do you, I mean, how are you thinking about that in Prince George's County?
Well, thank you. You know what? I think the most important aspect that we have as leaders of our relationship is a trust with the people. And I think that that each of us has had a chance to do that over these last several months by communicating seamlessly with the public in Prince George's. We've had a really great chance to do this. We've conducted throughout the pandemic a number of conversations, including teletown halls, where we have had as many as 60,000 of our residents who have tuned in to have conversations with us regarding the pandemic. And we have just been very truthful with them at every stage of this about where we are, what we see as our safe way forward. And because of that, I think that when we begin to speak to the public about some of the ways that we think we can maybe open up a little more, which I agree with Chairman Mendelson, I think won't be anytime soon. But I think really maintaining constant conversation with our community and being as forthcoming as we can with them about where we are with this pandemic, I think will go a long way toward helping to restore confidence. Now, on public transit, I think we've done an amazing job here. Our folks have done a great job of continuing to talk about all of our cleaning practices for transit. Transit is so important, not just to us here, but of course, you know, to this region. And we're going to be able to convince the public and convince our customers that we understand what they need in terms of keeping the transit clean, making sure that we keep our workers protected and safe. I think that's going to be very important. And I think as we have to do the same thing throughout our economy, is to really continue to speak to the ways that we see a path forward. We were able to establish a forward task force. And I agree with what Chairman McKay said in terms of really, this is a great opportunity to envision for us, not just how we get back to where we were, but I'm so excited about really the prospect of moving much further than we've ever gone before. And so we are imagining the ways that we can do that together as a community. And I think that as long as we continue to communicate with the public, as long as we hear from them and make decisions that are clearly respectful of them and their families, making decisions that are driven by medical professionals and scientists, we will do well in terms of continuing to earn the trust of the public.
Great, thank you. I know one of the things, you know, we look a lot at sort of the immediate economic recovery efforts that are necessary here, with the priority being, you know, getting people to work, making sure that we stabilize the employment situation, but then we're really thinking about, you know, economic renewal. You know, so there is a massive opportunity here for us to rethink the economy and what that looks like. And so we'll dig into that in a little bit, but I do want to follow up this a little bit around the public confidence, because that sort of underpins a lot of the other things that we're going to do. And Phil, Chairman Mendelson, in DC, you know, one of the things, DC still lists a number of states as being really high risk. You know, that doesn't necessarily reassure the public that you know, things are safe, or that we can get out and we can start doing things again. You know, how is that playing out? What are some of the things that we can do in the district that would really help reassure and restore public confidence?
Well, I think the question applies to all of us, not just the district. And
Sure.
I want to pick up on what Angela said. Public communication, that is what governments are communicating to their constituents, is critical. We learned that with regard to emergencies a couple decades ago in this region, that the public messaging makes a big difference. And we've been fortunate in this region that messaging around wearing a mask has not become political and controversial. And we're seeing a very large compliance with with that mask requirement, not just in the district, but in the region. And that makes a difference. The opposite is false statements, that the pandemic, we're turning the corner on it, or that we have enough PPE and testing and so forth. That creates distrust, and that is hard to overcome. We've been fortunate that we have not we've been good about this on a local level, not just in the district, but in the region. I would say what's also is important, and I see this particularly with how we're struggling to try to reopen our schools, is that we can't be forcing people to make decisions they don't want to make. There are a lot of folks who are very uneasy about going back to normal, about going back to the office or going back to school. And to the extent that people feel that they're forced, we're going to see that there's going to be a reaction to that, a negative reaction. So I think that's important in how we get back to reopening, which, as I said before, is going to be a slow process. I think keeping our numbers in terms of incidents of people who are getting sick and especially people who are getting hospitalized, keeping those numbers low is going to be critical in terms of trust and people wanting to get back to normal. And then I would also say, to the extent that each of us as a jurisdiction can ensure that there is adequate access to testing, as well as the PPE, that's going to help as well. When people feel they can't get tested, or they get tested and it's going to be a week before they get the results, that engenders distrust. And the more that we make the testing available, as well as ensure that there's adequate PPE in the community, that's going to help with the trust factor as well. I think Angela said it, trust is critical, and these are all different aspects of that trust: the communication, adequacy of testing, and so forth.
Jeff, are you approaching it from a similar perspective in Fairfax?
We are. I'm also blessed to preside over a community that fundamentally believes in data and science and thinks the government acts in their best interest. And so as a starting point, certainly that's an advantage we have over other parts of the country. But, I think our messaging is really important to our community. And we've really focused on not just succinct, truthful fact messaging, but also messaging reaching all parts of our community in various different languages and various different formats. People intrinsically trust Fairfax County as a messenger, and we've really used that to our advantage to make sure that we're getting the right information out. I think, this pandemic has shown as a region how when we work together, we can improve outcomes. And I'll give you an example, and this is a trust element and being transparent with people. When Governor Northam put out his metrics for reopening in Virginia very early on in the pandemic, we were looking at the metrics in Northern Virginia. We were looking at what Maryland and the district were doing. And we said, geez, our metrics in Northern Virginia don't meet the governor's criteria for reopening. And so the mayors and chairs of Northern Virginia, through our regional commission, got together and said, hey, we have a moral obligation to build the trust with our community, to make sure the governor is aware that as a region, we're not meeting these metrics. At the time, the state might, but as a region, we're not. And by pointing that out to the governor, of course, we slowed down the reopening in Northern Virginia. And to this day, I think it's a significant reason why we're not seeing some of the case numbers that are popping up in other parts of the state and other parts of the country. And so that was driven by not only a notion that we wanted to save lives, but also, if we're going to be trusted ambassadors, we need to be truthful with people. And when our numbers aren't matching some people's reality or some people's metrics, we need to point that out, because frankly, we need the public's help at that time to flatten the curve and to improve our outcomes. And so trusted messaging is critical. We know that we have to overcome the elephant in the room, which is at a national level. The messaging is inconsistent. It's untrue. At times it's incoherent. And so people more than ever are looking to their local governments and to their states for that trusted messaging. And that's a moral calling that we have, to continue to be transparent and open with people about our situation, and also to have them as a part of the team. Look, we're not going to get through this pandemic as governments. We're going to get through this pandemic if our populations adhere to the standards that we put out. And in Fairfax, I know that with the social distancing and the mask wearing and all the mandates that are out there, we strictly enforce those. We put people on the ground to make sure that people are adhering to those, because the consequences of not doing that are far greater than the consequences that people who don't adhere face. And so, we must continue to be aggressive in that area, and we must continue to be seen as the trusted place for people to get information, and all people to get that information. And that's where the platforms are important: social media, language translation platforms, messaging to our community-based nonprofits that are, working in our most vulnerable communities where we've seen spikes in cases. All those things are important to transparency.
Great, thanks. Let's talk a little bit about the economy. Yesterday, the Bureau of Economic Analysis announced record GDP growth of 33%. I think in 1950 we had 17%, but still we're not where we were a year ago. So we still have a long way to go. There's still a lot of problems out there. Just what's your view on the economy right now, both sort of regionally as well as in your own jurisdictions? And how do you see things evolving over the next year? I mean, is this a V-shaped recovery? Is it a W? Is it, what is that going to look like? And how should the business community be thinking about that from your perspectives? Angela, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, well, what I'll say about that is I think we are so fortunate that we are in a very strong neighborhood. So, for example, I think that even pre-pandemic, with our geographic connection to the District of Columbia and to Virginia, I think as a region, we were so strong pre-pandemic. I think that although all of us will see some declines in revenue, I'm sure Prince George's County definitely has seen that. So I know that we are all going to have some difficult challenges ahead of us and difficult decisions to make. I see that not only Prince George's County has had to make those difficult decisions around hiring freezes and making other decisions that are intended to help us move through this. But what I believe is that it's going to really reemphasize the point that we have to move forward as a region. This was the thinking prior to the pandemic, that we would have to, for example, approach some of the economic development opportunities that are coming as a region, rather than just looking as individual jurisdictions. And I think that going forward, it's going to be as more necessary than ever that we continue to position ourselves to compete with the rest of the country as a region. And I believe, we're going to see some pain over the next couple of years. But I'm confident that we will be able to make good decisions with the investments we make. That's the reason, again, preserving transit is going to be really important for us, especially as a region, making sure we continue to make those smart investments in education, that we invest in our workforce, that we do everything we can to help us save as many businesses. Prince George's County has done that, for example, through some of the aid that we've given with our care funding and other decisions we're making. We're even making investments in childcare right now, because we've seen, at least here, that many of our childcare providers, about 40% of them, expect not to be able to open their doors again. And so it is making those decisions right now that will help us to move forward in the future. And we're continuing to make sure we do that. But I'm confident that we will be able to recover, although slowly. But again, it's going to mean that we have to think as a region and to continue to have that collaboration and coordination that will help all of us to rise and move forward.
Yeah, a little bit later, I want to talk a little bit more about collaboration. But Phil, just from a DC perspective, how is the economy holding up, and where do you see things going in the months and year or two ahead?
Well, our economy is holding up in ways that is surprising, but that isn't to say that we aren't experiencing the recession just like everybody else. In the district, we have an independent chief financial officer, as you know, many of the participants know, and the chief financial officer is responsible for calculating the revenue estimates for the city. And that's a proxy, in my view, for where we are with the economy. When we went into the pandemic, we asked Jeff DeWitt to recalculate the estimates. And we were down roughly $750 million for the fiscal year that just ended, as well as for the fiscal year we're now in. A month ago, he recalculated those estimates again, and he increased the loss by another roughly 200 million. So that we're down almost $1 billion from where we thought we would be for the current fiscal year. At the same time, our revenues for the fiscal year that just ended September 30th, he revised upward by 200 million, which is to say that the net loss for fiscal year 2020 was $500 million, but the loss for, as I said, 2021 is about $1 billion. So we're still in a recession, but there are aspects of the economy that are doing better than we thought they would be, such as individual income tax. I think the big question is, what is this pandemic, with all of the emphasis on teleworking and of course the loss of jobs, going to mean in terms of office space in the future? We don't have an answer. For retail, I think we're unquestionably going to see changes in retail, and certain sectors like, well, the hospitality sector, but I was going to say restaurants and hotels, it's going to be a long time before they recover, and we don't know how much. And that is definitely hurting the district. There's even a question in terms of the rental housing market. So we are continuing to bring online new residential units in the district, but are we going to continue to see the kind of population growth, which I think to some extent is influenced by jobs? If there is a lot more teleworking, how much are there going to be jobs in the district as opposed to people working from their homes in Prince George's County or Fairfax County? And these are questions we just don't have answers for yet. So I would say there's a lot of uncertainty. I don't mean to suggest alarm, but just that we're going through transition, and I don't know what it's going to look like when we come out of this.
There's certainly a lot of transition. How do you think about some of the tensions that are emerging right now? So if you think about the potential increase in evictions, or folks that are having trouble paying their rent, but at the same time, the dependence on commercial real estate taxes and other things for revenues. So all these things are so integrated that it's really hard to view them in isolation without looking at the entire system. So how is it that we can really strike a good balance in both, protecting individuals in need as well as businesses and companies in need?
I don't think there's a clear answer there at all. So on the residential side, the council acted quickly to impose a moratorium. I think the federal government did that as well, but that's expired. And some of the local jurisdictions have done that. To what extent is there going to be this huge backlog that's just suddenly going to burst forth when that moratorium lifts? And there are a lot of collateral negative consequences from evictions. There's not an easy answer there. And I think that, I know at least our jurisdiction, we're not clear how we're going to address this, because it is, I'm going to say the intersection between politics, we don't want to see people being evicted, and economics, and that is that property owners have got to be able to pay their mortgages.
Right.
And all I can say is that there's a lot of uncertainty around that in the district, and I suspect elsewhere. And as well, we're going to see that on the commercial side, in terms of evictions. We put a moratorium on foreclosures, but that can't last forever. And what's the impact going to be when that moratorium is lifted, or how do we smooth the transition? These are important questions for which there are not answers. I wish that the economists were as good as the public health officials in being able to really show us the way in transitioning back in these areas.
Well, economics is the dismal science for a reason. It doesn't get us to a rational answer quickly. Jeff, out in Fairfax is an economic powerhouse in the region, significant job creation. How is the economy affected there, and what are you all seeing, and what do you think is going to happen in the months ahead?
Yeah, so we have a mixed bag, like so many other jurisdictions. I mean, I got to hand it to our Economic Development Authority. They have been amazing in attracting new businesses, new opportunities in the county. The Volkswagen announcement earlier this week was big for the county. And so we're pumping along great, attracting new businesses into the county, almost as if there wasn't a pandemic. And I got to, hand it to our EDA and our business community for the work they do on that front. And so that's a real positive. We know that our residential market is red hot. Interest rates are low. That's a positive for us. I think the concern we have is similar to the concern Phil has, which is what is happening with our commercial real estate. And I think that's particularly acute in Virginia because counties in Virginia rely so heavily on real estate taxes for our budget. And when I look at 65% of the county's budget made up of real estate taxes, that tells you how carefully we watch what's happening in our commercial and residential markets. And clearly, before the pandemic, there was this retail compression happening as a result of Amazon and so many other factors in the market pre-pandemic. And the pandemic has doubled down on that. We don't know what the office space future is going to look like, although we have reasons to be optimistic based on what is happening in the county right now. I think the biggest challenge we face as a community is this year we were grateful to receive $200 million in CARES Act money, which has helped us get through this budget year. We had our real estate values locked in before the pandemic for this year. We reassess every year, and really what I'm focused on right now is next year's budget, because I think that's where you start to really see what is the real economic impact on real estate values for local governments in Virginia. That's a huge look. Almost afraid to look under that blanket, but I feel like we're tracking pretty well in that area. And we may or may not have federal stimulus money to work with in the next budget. I mean, I'm hopeful that we do. I'm hopeful that the federal government passes another stimulus. Clearly, local governments need it. They're the largest employers in the country. And we want to keep our people working and keep our economy moving forward. And so we have this mixed bag. I think on the piece with housing, one of the things we've been grateful for is during this pandemic, have literally broken ground on hundreds of new affordable units in Fairfax County. And so many of the investments we've made in affordable housing are materializing during this pandemic. And I think as we look at the eviction moratorium and some of the challenges that people are facing in this economy, we had an affordable housing crisis before the pandemic. And if we're not increasing our affordable housing stock now, then we're set for real challenges as we move forward and recover from this. And so one of the key objectives of the county is to keep the momentum going on creating affordable housing, especially in places like Tyson's Corner, where there's huge job opportunities both today and into the future. And so we feel really optimistic. And I think, as others have said, I think Angela started her answer talking about the strength of our region. We were in such a good place when this pandemic hit. And I think, as an optimist, I always tell people that, if you really think about this country and what this pandemic is doing, there's probably no better region in the United States to live in if you're interested in a fast recovery than the Northern Virginia, DC, Maryland region. And so we're blessed with so many assets, with such good infrastructure before this happened, with a climate that's favorable to businesses, that I feel good about it. Lastly, we put nearly $60 million, record number of money, amount of money into our RISE grant program to help our small businesses through this. I'm most concerned about those very small businesses and their ability to make it through this. And of that $60 million, 80% of that went to businesses with employees between 1 and 10 people. And another 70% of that went to small minority, veteran, and women-owned businesses. And so what we've been putting our dollars into is helping the smallest of our businesses make it through this pandemic, because they're absolutely critical to our long-term economy. And so I think it's fair to say we're looking at a W here. To directly answer your question, we went down real quick. People started feeling good about the recovery. The economy started moving again. Clearly, we're seeing trends and cases that are concerning. And so we may see another dip, which is frustrating to all of us, I think. But I think at the end of the day, we're going to turn that and head upward pretty quickly. And so I think it probably more mirrors a W configuration than anything else.
Yeah, it's actually a question just came in about that, as we've seen, an increase in cases in Northern Virginia right now. And we're bracing for, as winter comes on and flu season and a whole host of other things. Are you guys concerned at all in Fairfax that you might have to reimpose some harsher restrictions with regard to
Well,
business activities?
yeah, I mean, well, we follow those numbers closely. Middle of October, we still had a positivity rate of 3.5%, which is very low. I think one of the reasons we're seeing our numbers go up, there's a couple factors. One is we are very aggressively testing. We are out testing by rate the Commonwealth of Virginia in Fairfax County by a lot, because we know that we want to know where there's positivity so we can address it. I mean, we've hired 400 contact tracers just in Fairfax County. We're running testing clinics in our most vulnerable communities. We're using mobile labs to test people. So we're very aggressively testing. And so a lot of times you look at our numbers, they're not, certainly not per capita, but our positivity rate still remains very good. The other metrics that are put out there, hospital capacity, supplies of PPE, all of those things are very favorable to us. But anytime you see an uptick, it's obviously reason to be concerned. And so we're double down on our message about, ways in which people can help us get through this pandemic. I think the biggest challenge we all face as a region is people's fatigue. And we have to remind people that, unfortunately, a national message that we've turned a corner. I mean, we have not. We have a long way to go here. We've made many sacrifices over many months. And now is not the time to blow all that recklessly because people are tired. And so we're going to keep messaging out. We're paying close attention to those numbers. I'm not hitting any alarm bells right now because when I look at us compared to the rest of the Commonwealth, we in Fairfax County are still doing exceptionally well. But we have to, we really have to watch that on a daily basis and make sure that we don't go in the wrong direction. And that we make sure that our messaging out there for people is still strong. And I think it's very important that people understand we've come a long way. A lot of sacrifices have been made. If we don't continue to adhere to those guidelines, we could be looking like what's happening in Southwest Virginia right now, where there's surging numbers and hospitals are over capacity. We're nowhere near that in Northern Virginia, thankfully, and we're grateful for that.
Great, thanks. Hey, I want to switch because I know we're going to run out of time, but I did want to switch and talk a little bit about education. Angela, how have you all been dealing with schools and school closures, virtual learning? Where are the schools right now, and what's the plan for moving forward?
So, it was a very challenging time for our jurisdiction because Prince George's County just happens to be, as you know, one of the largest school districts in the state. We also educate the largest number of disabled students in the state. 62% of our students are on free and reduced lunch. So, and we also educate the largest number of students who speak English as a second language. And so we educate in our school system a very large percentage of students who are disadvantaged and come from impoverished backgrounds. So that meant that we had to really double down on our investments in technology to make sure that all of our students had access to technology, to the Chromebooks, make sure that we also provided for them internet access, that we had to provide additional meals for our students. And so there were a number of things we had to do just to kind of shore up our students and their families. But the other, the upside to all of this is that we are looking toward the future. We know now that the investments we made in technology will continue. We believe that will actually be very helpful to us as we now know how to reach some of our youngest learners through the distance learning, that we can maintain that throughout. We also have had the opportunity last week, our school board passed our alternative construction financing model, which is going to be a model for the country, enabling us to tackle a very large backlog, $8.5 billion backlog in infrastructure improvements that were necessary. We're going to build 6 schools in the next 3 years. And we are looking as we go to Annapolis in January to further expand those gains and build upwards of at least a dozen schools over the next 7 years through this really aggressive model that we're using that will incidentally not only allow us to bring our buildings and facilities up to standard and to build beautiful facilities, but it will also, part of it is that we have a maintenance aspect to it that will allow us to maintain the schools for 30 years, create 3,000 jobs, and allows us to really infuse over $250 million into small, local, and minority businesses. So this is a really terrific model for us that allows us to continue to build for the future. Again, as I mentioned, we really regard the investments that we're able to make in our students and school system as investments in economic development. And so we're looking at all the opportunities that are coming. Our kids are suffering greatly. Many of them can't learn at a distance. And so we are mindful of that. We're going to get them safely to school as soon as it is feasible for us to do so. But right now, distance learning is where we are, and we will stay there at least until the end of January, and then we'll reassess where we are.
Yeah, your infrastructure program is really fascinating. And if folks aren't familiar with it, I would encourage you to take a look at it. Maybe we'll have you back and have a conversation about that, because I do think it's an emerging model that we'll start to see adopted in a lot of other jurisdictions across the country. Phil, in DC, where are you with the schools, and what does the timing look like? Angela just said end of January for Prince George's County.
Well, the mayor announced several weeks ago that we were going to reopen partially on November 9th. That's the end of the first term, and it's over the second term. And when I say reopen partially, really it was pre-K through third grade, if I remember correctly. And not every student would be expected to come back. Actually, sort of a hybrid model where some students would stay home. Students who, like special needs students, would be in school, and then the other students could come into school where there would be what I'll call supervised distance learning, online learning. So it was a hybrid. There's a lot of controversy around it. The Washington Teachers Union appealed that this was something that really needed to be, or aspects of this needed to be bargained. There's a lot of concern by teachers about whether there's will be adequate safety in the schools. And so I would say there's instability around the reopening plans at this point, but the DC public school system is still on course to reopen on November 9th, partially reopen on November 9th. And that's really just, as I said, for the lowest grades. Middle school, high school are still, would be distance learning. A lot of concern that the distance learning means there's slippage in academic achievement. And that has not been quantified, but I think that widely it's believed that we've seen some slippage with regard to achievement. And I mean, that is of a special concern to me, because education is a long-term investment. When we are dealing with issues like unemployment, people who are unemployable, all the consequences from that, all of that traces back to education and the quality of our education system. So we're talking about long-term consequences if we cannot overcome the gaps that we think are occurring because of distance learning. DCPS has distributed around 30,000 devices, 4,000 Wi-Fi hotspots that we are trying to expand access to Wi-Fi through an Internet for All program. The goal is 25,000 families. So this actually, in a way, is a positive in that when we come out of this, there's going to be much better Internet access and ability to do distance learning and everything else that comes with the access to the Internet. So that's a silver lining, but I'm trying to convey a lot of concern as we're trying to get back into at least some in-classroom teaching.
Great, thanks, Jeff. In Fairfax County, what's been your experience? What's the timeline look like? Have you been, thinking about, testing? Is testing helping to think about getting kids back into the schools?
So first, let me start with saying I have an elementary school student and a middle school student in Fairfax County Public Schools. So I am one of those many parents who is very frustrated, very challenged right now, but also very understanding of the magnitude of this challenge. And so one thing that's different for us is, we have a separately elected school board. We are their chief funding agent. 75% of the FCPS budget comes from Fairfax County. That's very different than most states where the state is the primary funding partner. And so, as you might imagine, we regularly share information with the school board. We try to collaborate with them as much as we can. Our health department has helped them rewrite a reopening plan that puts most of our kids, hopefully, back in school in January. We do have some kids in school now already, kind of testing some of those policies that have been put in place. Testing kids every day is not rational. It doesn't make any sense because those kids all go home every day. And, you know, it's not really a pod environment where testing every day can give you any level of clarity, even if you had the testing capability. And so we're realistic about that. I do think, you know, our role as a board really has been to support the school board. And Phil just mentioned a very true challenge that we're facing, which is what's happening with our kids that don't have parental supervision at home, don't have the type of strong internet access that the rest of us have. And so we've really looked at internet access as an essential utility in the same way you look at electricity and water. And so we've been very bold in putting out opportunities for our lower income residents to take advantage of low cost internet access. We're lucky to have an infrastructure in place where people can connect. One thing that I worked on with our county executive, and we decided early on that we were going to run a summer camp for kids to experiment with some of the health department guidelines for reopening safely and putting kids in pods and doing it in a very safe way. It was largely successful. As a result of that, we as a county, not as a school system, set up 37 locations across the county to run all day what used to be called a SAC program, which is a rec enrichment program. It used to be before and after school run by the county in our county schools. We set up 37 of those sites to run all day in our Title I schools. And so we were taking advantage of, you know, helping our most vulnerable kids with full day enrichment and with proctors to help them log on and help them compete in this new online world that we're facing. And so we look at our role really as making sure that we're helping the most vulnerable, making sure that we're providing the financial support to our schools, and really the health department expertise so that they can effectively reopen. The superintendent recently announced that, you know, we're hopeful all kids will be back in school by the end of January. But clearly that's contingent on making sure that it's safe and monitoring the numbers. And I don't think any of us really today can sit here and say with a total confidence what day that's going to be. What I can tell the Fairfax community is that the schools have developed a very clear set of metrics that allow the reopening. And there's nobody that doesn't want to reopen our schools. And we know how much that helps the economy, but we've got to do it safely. And the school board has the support of our board as we get through these challenging times, but it's a tough one.
Right. Yeah, I've got so many questions here. We're probably not going to get through all of them, but I did want to ask one question. Actually, Bob McCartney from the Washington Post asked a question, and he wanted just your reactions. All of you, you know, polls are suggesting that Mr. Biden will win the election. What would be the impacts on your jurisdictions of a Biden administration? Angela, do you want to?
Well, one of the immediate impacts we hope is that we will once again get realigned to potentially be able to welcome the FBI headquarters to Prince George's. As you know, prior to the current administration, we had been awarded 2 of the 3 final sites for the FBI headquarters, and we have a premium site at Greenbelt that we are hoping a new Biden administration will allow us to continue moving forward with that particular site and to welcome the FBI headquarters to Prince George's.
Yeah, great. Bill, how about in the district?
Well, I think that we're going to see if that happens, that there will be more federal stimulus funding, which will benefit the district as well as the region. I mean, we've all been struggling with the CARES Act money ran out, and yet the expenses continue. And what we've seen is that the CARES Act funding, as expensive as it was for the federal government, really helped the national economy, which in turn helped us locally as well. Just to give an example that's more specific to the district, we get reimbursed by the federal government for public safety costs related to national events like all of the protests around the White House or the Republican National Convention activities that happened at the White House, or the July 4th festivities on the mall. And the federal government has not reimbursed us. They've been very stingy, and that's a $43 million cost from last fiscal year. All of that, I'll call that a financial logjam, would be broken if we, meaning a good thing would be broken if we had a change in administration.
Jeff?
Well, first, I'm hopeful that Biden does win. I think Fairfax County is going to have stunning, record-breaking numbers. I have to tease Angela a little bit because I've got a site for the FBI in Springfield too, and we're going to compete.
We were talking about collaboration on economic development.
We're going to compete in a healthy way, but I think she's right. I mean, I think the Biden administration will finally say, let's put the FBI in a dignified, quality location. Let's invest in our federal workforce. So many of our constituents are federal employees, and Biden administration will lift up our federal workforce. And I think will be inspiring for the morale of so many people in our region. I think two other things. One, we'll have an administration that believes in data and science. And so when we're out messaging with our community, our messaging will be more in alignment. And people can trust government. And I think the second thing is we talked earlier about a vaccine. This is really important. I think the reluctance on a vaccine right now is that people think, things are going through a process that's not typical at the FDA and it's not safe. And they're hearing things from the administration that don't seem to make sense. And so I think a Biden administration automatically will put more faith in a vaccine when it's released and have more people take that vaccine to help our economy. And so I think probably the biggest shift is our federal employee morale, our federal contractors. I think Phil is right. We'll have a more positive stimulus package that will help local governments more, hopefully with revenue replacement and not just COVID expenses, but help us with revenue replacement. And we'll have messaging that is more consistent. And all of those things I look at as positives.
So we're running out of time. Just very, very quickly then, just wanted to give the last word to each of you. Angela, just what's the one most important thing that you want to get done between now and year end?
Oh my gosh, wow, the one thing. Well, you know what, one of the most important things for us is to continue to support our business community. We have to have jobs for our community to come back to. And so we are continuing. Not only we made the initial investment through the CARES Act funding, but we're making an additional investment now in our restaurants, who, as you know, are really facing a tough winter season. And so we're continuing to get that and to disperse really all of the funding that's needed for them, for the child care centers, and really for the backbone of our economy to continue to stand up so that our families will be provided for. So I think that's really one of our chief priorities, is to make sure that we're able to retain the businesses that we have, and we have to keep these projects moving, which I'm proud to say all of our major economic development projects, except one, are moving forward and on schedule. So we are really grateful for that. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure that Prince George's stays open for business, and that we continue to attract new businesses, which we're doing as well. And that we can move into a really strong posture in spite of our challenges into the new year.
Great, thanks. Phil?
Well, let's see. We've talked about education, an important priority. We've talked about the economy, an important priority. I'm going to throw one out that hasn't been discussed at all, and that is police reform. And this may be more of a sensitive issue in the district than in the region. Don't know. I think overwhelmingly that district residents support our police. At the same time, there is some distrust. We saw that earlier this week with protests around the 4th District Police Station. We have a police reform commission that's meeting and going to come up with recommendations, we hope, by the end of the year. I think that we have to look for ways to improve public trust of our police. Again, I think there is large scale support in the district for our police, but still this is an important issue. And I would add that I think that the district is far ahead of jurisdictions around the country in terms of policing. That doesn't mean that we can't make improvements. And that's what our Police Reform Commission is looking at. So that's high on the agenda.
Great, thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, those objectives are ones we have as well. I think probably since you asked for a single one, I think instilling in people the confidence that, you know, our local government here in Fairfax County is going to do everything we can to make sure that when we emerge, as we start to emerge from this economic downturn and this pandemic, that we're going to be ready to go. That we are, you know, we have a reputation, thankfully, being open for business and having an empathetic county board that, you know, wants to help all of our people succeed. And we know that one of the best ways you can do that is to grow your economy. And all the services that our residents will need as we move forward as a part of the recovery are contingent upon the quality of our economy. If we have the revenues, we can do more to help more people. And so I want people to know that this county is looking towards our economic recovery. We're looking towards growing our economy. We're looking towards rebuilding better than we were before. And frankly, that vision has to start now. We can't wait until the pandemic is over and then think about that. And so we're doing that as we speak now. And my goal by the end of this year is to have a lot more clarity in some of those areas so that we can lead the country in our recovery.
All right, well, that's great. Well, I want to thank you all very much for spending some time with us today. I know we only scratched the surface on a few things. There's so many other things that we could dig into. And so I look forward to continuing this conversation. I look forward to working with all of you as we continue to figure out the path ahead. There's a lot that we need to do. There's a lot we need to work on together. There's a few questions here that I think were really interesting. We'll follow up and we'll add those to our summary later. So folks that asked those questions, if we didn't get to them today, apologies, but there was so much to talk about. We couldn't cover everything, but again, thank you for your leadership. These are not easy times. I know it's just difficult, you know, managing home and work and community and everything else and trying to make these decisions the best we can. And so, you know, and let us know too if there's other things that we in the business community can be doing to support your efforts as well. And we will get through this and we will be stronger. But it's going to take us some time and effort. So thank you all very, very much. I appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody who joined us today and have a nice weekend.